So we're waiting just one more minute to get started. Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone. We're going to start the panel about successfully executing blockchain products. I'm Jorge Garcia. I'm one of the founding partners and CTO of Hello Iconic. We have today three amazing panelists, all very active on the blockchain community. We have Nick Casares from Polyant Games. We have Carlos Cerrato from Ika. I was gonna say Aki, and I was no, that's wrong. From Ika Technologies, and we have Santi City from Democracy Earth and Proof of Humanity. Welcome everyone. So basically, we like to do this webinar, and basically it's a series about product strategy, product design, product engineering. These are things that we love. And today we're going to discuss about executing blockchain products. This is not going to be about trading. It's going to be about building. So it's going to be about why blockchain, what technologies can we use, what opportunities does it exist. We're going to touch a little bit about DeFi and beyond that, open source and the role of community on the blockchain in the blockchain world. We have normally an audience, both on audience here plus people that rewatch what we see, and 100 plus members on the community. Normally we have a mix. It's different companies. We have large companies like Morgan Stanley, Chase, some startups, companies in different areas, entertainment, fintech, blockchain. So we have different, a mix of companies, but at the same time, mix of roles. So product managers, CTOs, founders, directors of technology. So we have different people in different areas. So we're going to start with some introductions. So let's continue, and we're going to give some time to our panelists to introduce themselves. So we're going to start. I think it was we're going back a little bit. We're going to start with Nick. So maybe Nick, if you can introduce yourself, and we're going to go in sequence. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you, Jorge, for the introduction. Everyone, it's nice to be here. Thanks for taking time out of your day to listen to this conversation. So my name is Nick Casares. I'm the head of product at Polyant Network. Also, a piece of what we do is Polyant Games, two kind of related companies. My background is in early stage product development and user experience. And so for the past decade or so, I've been living at the intersection of SaaS software across a variety of verticals. I've played in everything from consumer-based cloud products to marketing analytics, to public safety, commercial real estate, and now blockchain. And so along the way, the red thread through my path has been just a gravitation toward early stage product development. I've also spent time working with founders in incubator settings and helping them sort of iterate through that initial stage of product development. And that's a lot of what we do at Polyant as well. So I hope to share some of my experiences today and help you kind of get a handle on how we've approached this part of the process. So glad to be here. Thank you, Jorge.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Now we're going to move to Carlos.
Okay.
Oh, no,
thank you,
Santi,
Jorge.
Yeah.
Or Santi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's let's go with Santi and then Carlos. Sorry for that.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's my turn.
yeah.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me fine? Because I'm getting some weird messages from Zoom.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Santiago City. I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina, born and raised there. Now living in Madrid, Spain. I've been involved with software technology over the last 20 years of my career. Always as a programmer, as a software developer, I always try to write some code on a daily basis and try to keep my pace of contributions to projects, always doing open source software. To give you a little background of what I have done over the years, I actually began my career as a game developer, developing video games for PCs and computers. Later on, I moved on to building technologies that did market research using big data in social media. I ran a company called Popigo for 7 years that was acquired by a Brazilian startup back in the day, over 10 years ago. And closer to the present, in the last decade, I've been pretty much involved with blockchain development. I've been a Bitcoiner since 2011, still a Bitcoiner, even though sometimes I have grown to learn and love more other projects like Ethereum in the recent years, especially. In 10 years ago in Argentina, I actually started a political party that got me into the problem of figuring out how to do democracy over the internet. And throughout the last 10 years, with my team, we have been implementing democratic pilots around the world. In 2015, we got incubated by an accelerator in Silicon Valley known as Y Combinator that allowed us to create the Democracy Earth Foundation. And through that organization, we have deployed democratic pilots in several places, from Hong Kong to Tunisia, to Buenos Aires, Mexico, United States. And something that we have learned across all of our implementations is that the main problem or the main hurdle or the main reason that we do not have a democracy on the internet today is probably the lack of a way of doing human identity in a decentralized way. So in the more recent years, we have been at Democracy Earth researching this problem of decentralized identity. And in 2021, we released Proof of Humanity, which is a protocol for decentralized identity that delivers universal basic income. It does so using the Ethereum network, and it leverages all of the DeFi ecosystem to make it happen. So it's a very exciting project. We launched 3 months ago. We have around 7,500 humans. The growth is nice and steady, and a very highly experimental project, but nonetheless, a lot of interesting lessons there about how to execute blockchain projects.
Awesome. Thank you, Santi. And we're definitely have a section today on talking about leading an open source and open project and community as you're doing. So that's an interesting conversation. And then finally, we go to you, Carlos.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. It's a real pleasure to be here and honored to share in this panel with other great professionals. So on my side, I started off my career about 12 years ago, mostly working with enterprise and government institutions, very oriented to finance by coincidence since I started. Then I moved into international clients. I did work with Wells Fargo Bank and other international financial institutions. And about 5 years ago, I did a switch from all that enterprise institutional world over to the startup world. And then I had the opportunity to work with some of the most bleeding edge artificial intelligence companies here in Latin America, and also got the great opportunity to work on blockchain, right? I'm personally very passionate about the industry, all the opportunities and the potential that it represents for our society and moving forward in the 21st century. So as soon as I could, I got into it. I built a team from scratch for companies that I would partner with, and then deployed many layer 1 protocols, smart contracts protocols, wallets, decentralized exchanges, all sorts of different platforms, and it was quite an experience to jump into this so nascent industry, right, where so many practices that are still missing, right? And right now, I'm working on ICA, which is a stealth artificial intelligence platform. Can't talk much about that one, but I'm also working with IOHK, which is the company behind Cardano and other blockchain tools. And there I'm in charge of everything related to EVM development and Solidity smart contracts as well.
Yes, sorry. So I'm improvising here from the phone. So we never had technical issues. This is the third one, but yeah, tercera es la vencida, we say in Spanish. So cool. Awesome. Well, in my case, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Jorge Garcia. I'm one of the founding partners and CTO at Hello Iconic. So I've been doing products for 20 plus years. Especially, I love to do products that are facing users. I've done social entrepreneurship as well, been involved in auditing elections. So that's something that I've been doing in Honduras initially. And with that, we developed a blockchain product, which actually is the reason why I started being involved on blockchain projects. To talk a little bit about what we do at Hello Iconic. Basically, we are what's called a digital product agency. So we help companies and entrepreneurs that want to create products. We have done it for millions of users, literally. Different brands. We work with large companies such as Disney, Viacom. We've worked with Netflix. We also work with startups. So we are in different areas. One of them is streaming on the media and entertainment world. We do fintech as well. So we're with companies like the Change Company, for example, Suma Wealth, which is a startup on the Latino space here in the US. We also do blockchain products and more recently, cybersecurity as well with Cyvatar that just today they just announced that they raised $9 million. So we're super happy for them, and we're working together and very closely on the execution side. We help normally companies on the design and engineering side, and also, but we also help them very early on the strategy, helping defining what they want to build, kind of like limiting scope so we can define a proof of concept or an MVP, and then working to launch that, and then evolving the product. So I think that's super important. And then, well, finally, basically, it's something that we like to do is basically just help companies that want to create things. And as I was mentioning, I started doing the blockchain side of things with a project called Balloted. Actually, we started with something that was called Voto Social, which was an auditing platform for elections that we worked with some friends, started launch in Honduras after the 2013 election. That led me to voting as a mechanism of transparency using blockchain. And we launched last year, officially Balloted, which basically run elections with universities. Started with more a commercial approach and less about high stakes elections, just because we wanted to prove the technology first. And that's basically what we've been doing. And that led us to focus on developing products. And with that, we started to work more with companies that want to launch a blockchain product. We basically did some announcements, but let's get started. I think just one final announcement is we're celebrating Pride Month, so super happy to do that. And also last month was Asian Pacific Heritage Month. We're always celebrating with our communities here in the US and in the world. So let's get started. Basically, like I brought this image just because I think all of us here in the panel, we believe in blockchain technology, and we're actively doing things on the blockchain world. But one of the things that we always get asked is why blockchain? And kind of brought this funny, and I think we're all seeing variations of this. But I would like to use this as a starter in seeing like why blockchain? Why do we want to build a blockchain product, and what does it solve? So I don't know if someone of you wants to start. Maybe Nick, we start with you, and we move with the panel.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think it's the question that every project who's considering blockchain needs to figure out first, right? Blockchain is a technology that can be applied, but it's not good for everything. And in a lot of cases, it shouldn't be used. I would say most cases, a blockchain is not the right solution. It's probably just a database. But what blockchain is really good for, and I think where it makes sense to bring into the conversation is, if you think about the evolution of the web and you think about the evolution of technologies, they've always sort of come to mass adoption through things like intermediaries. And so when we talk about, financial services, or we talk about systems where multiple participants need to play a role, there's generally some sort of intermediary in that process. It could be a clearinghouse, it could be an agency. And that's a point of centralization that more and more in our society, I think, is proving to not serve the entire constituency well. And so blockchain does a really interesting thing. It plays an interesting role in allowing a diverse group of participants to participate in a way that is decentralized, that doesn't require trust in an intermediary, and allows for more fair participation in the system. And so I think anybody who's approaching product development and thinking about blockchain, if bringing a community, a decentralized community, into the fold is part of your mission, if you're thinking about how do we connect people in a trustless way, those would be good reasons to evaluate blockchain as a potential path to your solution.
Awesome, thank you. And I don't know, Santi or Carlos, if you want to take a stab on it. Yeah.
Sure thing. Yeah, pretty much echoing what Nick just said. Most of the time, people go into blockchain because it's the hype, right? It's what's hot right now. Sometimes people only get funding when they, use a hype word, right? If you're not with the coolest tech, it's harder to find clients or investors. So that's why some people do it, right? It's not that they don't know it sometimes. But essentially, I would say that blockchain is another social coordination tool, right? It's a story, right? It's similar, and it's actually funny that it has many use cases, but the first use case was money, because money is probably the best analogy to something of what blockchain is, in the sense that it's kind of like a store of data, right? It's a store of value. It's a story. It's something that lives in the intersubjective realm of people's mind, right? Because it's not objective in the sense that it doesn't exist in nature. It's not something that that you have a scientific proof to determine what something is worth, right? So it's an intersubjective shared experience. That's what money is, and that's what blockchain allows us to create, but with more flexibility, right? So we can create money with it, right? Just that was the origin with Bitcoin, but now we find out that we can create other things with it, right? Just like the project Santi's working on for elections and creating trust, and you yourself would validate. You can also create new experience like Polyant games, and you can create NFT projects if you're doing art, for example. So we're grabbing this this tool, and basically it allows us to create narratives on steroids, so to speak, right? Because it's a new type of human coordination mechanism. So when you need that, use blockchain. If you don't need that, don't use it.
Awesome. And I'm gonna use that, and it's like one of the questions that I would like that I think many of us have is like, what do you think at this moment are key innovations that were brought by blockchain that weren't possible necessarily with other technologies, and why? Why do you think that? So I don't know, maybe Santi, you want to start, and we'll take it from there. Yeah.
So I guess that maybe the main difference between blockchain and other protocols that we had in the past, like the web or email, for example, is that fundamentally the blockchain has this property of this emergent property as a consequence of decentralization of immutability. And the immutability, what gives you is a context where whatever gets written in that in this thing we call blockchain, no one will be able to modify the history of that or what has been written. Once written, will never be erased. So it turns out that this is a very useful thing to build bureaucracies or any kind of institution or organization that needs to be a source of truth. And in that sense, that's why these cryptographic networks are very useful for thinking social and economic systems, which require sources of truth that cannot be corrupted, or the cost of corrupting them is incredibly high. And there's a way that Andreas Antonopoulos puts it that I like it very much. And he argues that institutions, at the end of the day, are fundamentally a collection of promises. And the main difference between the legacy organizations of the past, or the institutions of the past, and the kinds of institutions that we can build with these new networks is that the promises based on authority, on corruptible authority, on authority that can sometimes be judgmental and can be biased and has an ideology or whatever. Those promises are ultimately soft promises. But with crypto, whatever defines that source of truth is a hard promise, because it's not executed by an authority that has power and can be corrupted, but it's ultimately a consequence of pure mathematics. This miracle of cryptography or modern mathematics that Satoshi Nakamoto, Vitalik Buterin, and many others like people that continued in that tradition enabled this new possibility. So what we're seeing on the internet or on cyberspace with these networks is not a cultural transformation or a cultural revolution where we are able to communicate with each other peer-to-peer, but it's even more than that. It's an institutional shift in many regards. And that means that the kinds of applications that we need to think and design when we build for these networks are institutions. Money is an institution, without doubt, and certainly a very important one. And the fact that blockchains are being able to disrupt money proves that how powerful these networks are. No one expected that we would find a technology able to challenge the US dollar, even from within Americans themselves. Like, it's really a very persuasive and very powerful kind of technology as a source of trust, and to build that kind of institution. On identity is another one. With proof of humanity, what we're trying to address is, well, what it takes to formalize human identity on networks of this kind, simply using incentives, because an important element that you have to consider when thinking applications or protocols built on these networks is that the user is no longer just a consumer of your application that simply, or a producer that contributes data or consumes data. Now your user has an incentive to behave. You can model around incentives or mechanisms that can shape how your user behaves. For instance, in proof of humanity, when you create your own proof, you have to pay a deposit. And that deposit, you will get it back if you do the proof the right way and no one challenges your proof. But if someone challenges your proof, that deposit will be used on an arbitration contract, and the challenger has an incentive because he wants to earn that deposit that the producer of the identity pays. So there's this extra layer of incentives, or an incentive mechanism or mechanism design, which is a whole discipline in economics, by the way, like game theory, which is really interesting that we now have to build with that kinds of considerations when we design social, political, economical, financial systems in this type of networks.
Awesome. And we're going to come back to that part of incentive, because one of the things that I started to notice as working with blockchain products is there are certain patterns that are starting to emerge when designing a successful product. One of the things is incentives, as you mentioned, which is pretty interesting. Cool. Nick or Carlos, I don't know if any of you want to add, like, well, again, like why blockchain made possible some innovations, and which ones, for example? Yeah.
One of the innovations that I'm particularly excited about, and this is more of a technical innovation at the moment, but I think it's going to have continued implications into the future of technology playing a role in our lives is NFTs, or non-fungible tokens. I'm obviously in the gaming space. I'm also in the NFT space. And so it's close to home. But the idea that we can, for the first time really on the web, or in the history of the web, be able to cryptographically prove ownership of a digital item today seems a little bit nerdy and like, well, how are we going to really do anything with that outside of, maybe art or in-game items? But I think it has really strong implications for the future. If we abstract that idea of a digitally provably owned item, and especially as our lives begin to merge with digital participation in things like metaverses or augmented reality, those kind of controls of the things that we own are going to be just as important as titles and documents and notaries of the real world today.
Awesome. Cool. So let's move a little bit about execution. So we talk a little bit about why blockchain, and I know because I know many of the people are here on the audience that they are starting to think, or they're building something, or they want to build something. Right? And one of the questions that I always get asked is about getting started. Where do I start? So that's a little bit the conversation. So I would like to start with you, Nick. And I was mentioning it to you in the prep, but I really admire the way you work, where you always kind of think about, okay, let's build a POC first, something that's, I don't know, quick, 2 weeks, up to 4 weeks at most. And then after that, you kind of seem like have a lot of clarity of what you want to build. And it's like, okay, now this is the MVP and go. So yeah, I would like to know a little bit about your thinking when you want to build a blockchain product. Like, what are you trying to achieve with that POC, and how do you decide to focus on what to launch? So let's start with that.
Sure. Yeah. POCs are a big part of what we're doing at Polyant, and I think they're a healthy practice for product development, period. But with blockchain in particular, it's been useful for us because it lets us really clarify and validate assumptions that we have about what we're trying to build, who we're trying to help, or even just the technical feasibility of doing something. And so where I tend to start with a POC is, what's the question that we're trying to answer with this proof of concept? And again, we're going for narrow scope. So this is, like you said, a couple of sprints maybe, or even just a quick tech spike. But what is the unanswered question or risky assumption that we're making if we don't pull over and try to do this quickly? So that could be, can we actually develop the functionality in the contract? Most recently, there are a lot of issues with gas prices on Ethereum, right? So if you want to do something complex, maybe we need to run a quick test to see what the gas price is going to actually play out like in a real mainnet environment. Those are more technical issues. And then you start to cross over into things like UX, right? So the UX for blockchain today is very, it's unrefined. It's not great. And it's very difficult for the average user to get involved with using crypto or using any kind of blockchain application. So I think there's even value in the POC stage of just getting your thoughts on paper of what is the flow and what's the interaction with a smart contract to actually get the user to the desired end state. Because sometimes you get to the process and you realize, oh, wow, this is actually going to be really, really complicated. And maybe we actually need to think about breaking this down or doing some other type of onboarding, or maybe just there's an alternative approach. And so POCs for us allow us to see those things a lot earlier versus let's build a roadmap and a product spec. And, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of resources. And the industry moves so fast that you want to be able to iterate quickly and kind of move with the development of the industry at large.
Awesome. One question, additional question there. One of the things that I've noticed is that you always have a balance between relying on things that already exist, like something like I don't know, like a project that already exists, open source or not, and building like if you can tell us a little bit of, like, in your experience, what projects are must-haves now that you want to build? Like, okay, normally if I want to build, at least these things are always involved or seem to be involved.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, some of the basic infrastructure, things like Infura, things like IPFS, Pinata more recently, some of those basic things that in a more traditional product development stack, you'd look at AWS, you'd look at containerization technologies, and you would say, why would we possibly reinvent the wheel? That exists, that lets us go faster. And so we're always looking for frameworks. On the smart contract side, you have things like OpenZeppelin, which provide a lot of sort of skeleton contracts for teams that are trying to prop things up quickly. So those are some of the basics, and the landscape is emerging every day, and there are new tools on the horizon every day. And it's something we're thinking about too, is as we're making our own developments and potentially innovating in whatever we're doing, is there something that we can give back that we've learned along the way and turn that into a tool to help somebody else? Because this really is, a lot of blockchain development stems from the open source world. And I think there is really this community spirit of rising tides lift all boats. And so if we can help share what we learn with other teams, it helps this entire industry mature a lot faster.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. Carlos, I don't know if you can share also some other projects that you think that are kind of like top of your mind. Whenever I want to build something, probably at least I have this in mind. Yeah.
On my side, well, actually, I'd say that one of the key things that have been extremely useful have been the front-end libraries. For example, you had Web3, right? Which was, it was actually the only option for some time. And then lately you have Ether.js, for example. It's a great library that a lot of people are using. Hardhat has also come to provide a lot of kind of like a DevOps feeling for blockchains, right? Because it allows people to automate and script a lot of their work. And some of them are just conventional tooling, conventional methodologies applied to the blockchain industry. As Nick was mentioning, you have containers. Like, for example, we build everything in Docker, right? Even our full nodes are Dockerized, right? So basically, try to automate as much as possible. When you have small teams, that's very important, but also try to avoid that getting in the way, right? If you have a project that you need to test out and validate quickly, you might not want to do all of this grunt work up front, right? You might want to get out, as Nick was mentioning, a proof of concept first, and then work on improving all of that things. But in terms of toolings, those are the ones that come to mind right now. But again, the industry is also evolving literally every day, right? So tomorrow we might get a new announcement of something really cool. So basically, you gotta stay on top of all crypto Twitter to see what's up.
Exactly. And I don't know, Santi, if you have any others to add there on. I saw you nodding on several of them, so that's great.
Yeah, of course. Especially because little footnote, Hardhat is a great tooling library. It's taking over Truffle. I use it a lot, and it's developed by Argentines. And OpenZeppelin, again, another company started by people from my country, which makes me very proud. Those are two must-use tools. OpenZeppelin has an incredible set of smart contracts. Hardhat is an incredible tool for testing the contracts, writing the tests. And as a developer, always keep an open mind, be curious, try technologies that you find interesting. This is a very, very young space still. What I like about it actually is that it really feels like programming a Commodore in 1979. Like, it's very early. Like, smart contracts really are very few lines of code, and you can achieve a lot with very little. You just have to find what's an interesting project that fits on a bigger puzzle, ideally, and take it from there. But with the interesting thing is that with maybe 200 or 300 lines of Solidity, you can harness a lot of power, because building, I'm an Ethereum, I have to make that disclaimer, but being able to compound in a permissionless way with all of the universe of smart contracts that you will find available on the mainnet, from Yearn Finance, Aave to Uniswap, like, you can also include those as libraries that you can work with and leverage with. And it turns out that these libraries are sources of money, of power. And if you find like incentives and interesting mechanisms that ideally the user will agree can lead to an interesting behavior in financial terms, then you have a very interesting project in your hands. Like, keep in mind that the composability and the liquidity of the network that you are building for is a killer feature. In this type of networks, of course, scalability matters a lot, and transaction per seconds, and all of those performance metrics. But the liquidity and the composability of the network itself, what the network gives you, the world computer gives you, is an incredible feature that you have to consider when you design a system in this type of context.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think I want to segue this to another question. You mentioned that you're on Ethereum. Nick, you mentioned about cost. So there's always this question of which blockchain to use. And we have, well, there's not really initially the Bitcoin blockchain, but Ethereum has been kind of like the king of the smart contracts and all. And I'm going to start with you, Carlos, because I know that you also implement, like put up custom blockchains and everything, but it's like, I mean, what blockchain to use and why? I would like to get a little bit of your opinion, and also like sharing of your experience of a custom network as well. So yeah, I would like to start with you, Carlos. Yeah.
Sure thing. Okay, so two things there, right? One, there are two ways to look at it. A lot of people look at it from a community perspective, right? In the sense that you're part of a tribe or a family or a team. So like if you go to the people that are Solana, they're diehard Solanas. The ones that are Ethereum, they're diehard Ethereums. And when you're looking at it that way, there's no possible conversation, right? Because it's basically like picking a football team, right? It can end in a fist fight if it gets too intense. So that's one point of viewing, and people choose it based on what they feel represents them, right? In terms of values, culture, because all of these communities have slight differences. Like you'll start, like if you get to know a lot of Bitcoin people, you will start to see a lot of attributes in that community, and then you will see different ones and values too in Ethereum. So that's one way to choose it, right? You pick the people that you want to work with, or the community and environment and ecosystem that you want to be with, right? That's one thing. But if you're talking purely from an analytical product perspective, then what you need to do is analyze which are the key components that you can leverage for your product, right? So I think that it's no secret right now, and without a doubt, that Ethereum is the biggest network in that sense, right? It has the largest number of protocols and tools that you can use and leverage, right? So that's probably what a lot of people that are building financial systems want to go to. But then there's other aspects, like give you an example. There's one DEX called Bisq. So those guys are very heavy Bitcoin and Monero users, right? Because they're very focused on privacy, and they're very focused on, a lot of, let's say, like OTC trading, right? That's the type of functionality that they're developing. So for them, it makes more sense to use Bitcoin and Monero as opposed to Ethereum, right? Due to the attributes of Bitcoin's liquidity, which isn't even a technological feature, right? It's a product feature. It's an economic feature in the sense that, it's not about technology. It's just about the fact that Bitcoin's brand is the one that's most recognized and readily accessible for liquidity to cash, right? For fiat on and off ramp. So those guys use a lot of those protocols, right? And then there's other products that need a user experience that's really fast, right? They can't wait, not even for the 20 seconds that it would take in Ethereum. They need it really quickly, right? So those guys might want to either go to some of the smaller sidechains, right? Or they can deploy their own. So in the experience that I've deployed proof of authority protocols, as you state, it was basically because the clients needed really high speed, and they didn't really need that much of interconnection with the other protocols, right? They didn't need Aave for lending, they didn't need Uniswap for exchanging. So in that particular use case, it just made, they did want smart contracts, right? Because they wanted to be able to expand their API, but they didn't need to connect with it, right? So we deployed our own infrastructure. Beware that is insanely more complex and painful than just doing smart contracts and applications and managing Ethereum nodes and making sure that that's a reliable network. It's really challenging. And there's not much expertise on it, right? So it's not like you can just get a person to do that really quickly, like you would with normal infrastructure. Right? But I would say that those are kind of like the three different ways to see that.
I like the way that you broken down, and the fact that it's like, yeah, there is the community aspect. You cannot fight with that. So most of the audience is very on the analytical. So I think it's what you, based on what I hear, is what you want to build, and then every network has specific advantages. So you tend to use what makes sense for the product that you want to build. Being Ethereum the king right now, so to speak, and Nick, I know you're building on top of Ethereum. How do you work around on the cost side, or does it matter or not? Like, I would like to know what's your perspective on that. Yeah.
And by cost, do you mean the user cost of transactions?
Transaction, yeah.
Yeah. So this is kind of the friction point for Ethereum, in my opinion, and it's actually in recent, the past few weeks, it's gotten a lot better. So gas has actually come down, but the problem here is that it's unpredictable for users. And so when we see a spike in network activity, and we had DeFi summer, gas prices go up, and suddenly you're edging out participation in the network by the average person who just wants to use an application. We're not going to scale this technology that way, at least not to mass adoption. And so I think that there is ultimately, I think we're headed to a multi-chain world. And my hope for the user experience is that someday, maybe 20 years down the road, I'll be able to interact with blockchains and not even know what network it's on, and not even care, right? I have something that I want to participate in, and we have enough tools and tech to get us there. But in the interim, I think we're going to constantly be evaluating, as Carlos mentioned, where is the best user experience going to be? Which network can provide that today? Is it a fast L2? Or do we need to actually build our own network to facilitate these kinds of transactions? So, I think it's, as Carlos said, always a trade-off. You're kind of always evaluating what's the financial utility of the network, what's the functionality that we need, and what are our capabilities to work with this network. And then finally, what kind of user experience do we want to deliver?
Yeah. And one question there, have you got to the point of considering, as you were mentioning, something like, I don't know, go to XDAI or even jump into something like Flow from Dapper Labs? Have you ever considered that? Why or why not?
We have actually, and we're actually in the process of evaluating porting a set of contracts to a couple of different EVM compatible networks. And so EVM compatible, for anybody on the call that might not have heard that before, it's compatibility with the Ethereum virtual machine. But in plain speak, that means that code developed in Solidity can very easily run on another chain that is EVM compatible. And so we're looking at those EVM compatible chains as a first step. So things like Polygon, things like Avalanche, anything where it makes sense to quickly port those contracts and provide that functionality on other networks. There's also a product validation aspect to that as well, because as the network activity moves around to these new networks, we want to be able to follow users and try value propositions there and experiment and see if we get different levels of adoption on different networks. Because as Carlos mentioned, every network is going to have its pros and cons. Every network will eventually serve a different audience a little bit differently. So this gives us a really great opportunity to experiment with that.
Awesome. Moving a little bit, but still, like, I would like to know, Santi, in your case, I know you're on Ethereum, and I would like to ask you why Ethereum?
It's a great question. Well, to me, like, the flashback memories from being 10 years on this space, like every time I try to look at the peak of the different tops that we faced, if we take the value of Bitcoin as the benchmark for the whole industry, and I compare the top of 2017 with the top we had this year, what can I remember being around me in those contexts? And maybe I can also bring, like, probably I think it's in 14 or 13, but none as significant as 17 and 21, right? And when I think about Ethereum, I see a lot of progress. Like, if I try to remember, well, Ethereum began in 2015. Before 2015, there was probably Vitalik and a white paper going around and gaining momentum. But in 2017, we had the ICOs, which obviously there was a lot of noise around that, and a lot of very strange things happening. There was also the forking happening in Bitcoin, which Bitcoin seems to be very zero-sum in terms of how the community behaves around the protocol. Whereas with Ethereum, you had the programmability that introduced Ethereum, the idea that you can have a programmable blockchain that is Turing complete and you just write smart contracts using a programming language that introduced a lot of possibility of innovation and hence the ICOs. And I would agree that I wasn't that big of an ICO investor myself. I probably participated in one or two, not no more than that back then. I was still a little bit conservative with my holdings. But if I compare that context with 2021, we have a lot of things, like suddenly Uniswap became a magnet for liquidity with a very interesting protocol that is doing a lot of on-chain swaps and enabling permissionless listing of tokens, which is an incredible feature to have. We have all of the DeFi protocols, all of the different ways of leveraging the network and the capital available in the network. Wire Finance is only a year and a half. Like a year and a half ago, it had only $2 million. Now it has $4 billion. Aave, MakerDAO over the years has been able to mint over 3 billion in DAI with decentralized collateral using cryptocurrency as collateral. And the evolution of those projects, the fact that now we have a much more real infrastructure around. I remember thinking in 17, will there be killer apps on Ethereum or not? Because absolutely all of those were a promise in 17. There was maybe some weird day where CryptoKitties clogged the blockchain and everyone started talking briefly about NFTs back then. But now, we had an NFT, sold by 69 million, and at the same time, a lot of different museums and contexts that allow you to experience NFTs in different flavors. Like the infrastructure evolution of Ethereum is very impressive. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, what really made me fall in love with that protocol was the people, the community. I remember going to a DevCon in Prague in 2018, and then I went to Osaka, and just meeting the people behind these projects was inspiring. And I felt that I have to say that it's maybe a community I have more personal alignment in terms of values and the possibility of innovation than other communities like Bitcoin, which tends to be more homogeneous ideologically, and more probably based on the economics of the challenges that this kind of money faces with the world than the computing aspects, which I heard that mentioned, and that resonated very well with me. And I guess it's also, you have to consider that you're building with others, and others will, without asking for your permission, if you're building in an open source way, will start looking at your stuff and maybe contribute an idea or two. Sometimes you might get lucky enough that someone might come with a finished project altogether. To me, with Proof of Humanity, since we launched, that was the biggest shift in mindset. Going from a small team trying to brainstorm ideas and implement them, to suddenly realizing we're a community and the ideas come at you at the same, finished, completed, with a proof of concept, with a written smart contract. And suddenly realizing that my role is no longer thinking about anything, but actually listen and trying to connect and becoming more of a community manager and someone that tries to rally the community, because I've been since the beginning, and that's very impressive. You have to be aware that you might end up building alongside others across cyberspace around the world that might dig into your project. And the Ethereum community, the liquidity, the composability, those incredible properties to me matter. And I guess that's why I chose Ethereum. And I learned through that choice to remain and keep an open mind, because at the beginning I was skeptical about everything, as you should be probably in this space. But always keep at least one door open. And Ethereum captured me, thankfully, because of its great community of builders and makers, and you can see the results all around.
Awesome. And I'm gonna use, you talk about skepticals, and you will see me tapping the screen is just because I'm from the phone right now, just reading the questions. And there is a question from Eduardo Tobon, and he's basically asking, like, for non-crypto and skeptical folks, what would you point to as a proof of concept to get them more seriously take for blockchain? So I would just, like, what would you recommend for people that are dealing with people that are skeptical, for example, in larger companies or even smaller companies, like there may be a crypto approach, but they don't know where to start, and there's a lot of resistance, skepticism. What would you recommend for people that are more, that want to do that innovation, how to approach that? I don't know who wants to take a first stab.
I can take a first stab. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a generic answer, but I think it's an important step. If you're evaluating blockchain for suitability in any application, I think step one is get involved with the technology. You know, you don't need to become a technical expert, but spend some time immersed in what's actually happening in the community that you're thinking about building in, right? So if it's Ethereum, spend some time getting to know some of the bigger projects. Spend some time, there's a lot of great resources out there that can give you a lay of the land, whether it's DeFi or NFT. You know, spend some time learning who's doing what the big projects are, so you can start to see the size and shape of what is possible and some of the trajectory of some of these projects. You know, as Santi was mentioning, some of these DEXs and some of these DeFi projects, the amount of traction that they've gained in such a short time is just incredible, right? And if you're speaking to an executive audience and trying to convince them of the business case, who doesn't like up and to the right? And some of those have been really incredible. So, but you have to have that initial baseline of knowledge. You have to know what's available. So I would say, you know, step one, start learning a bit about the technology, a bit about the community, and understand the bigger, more successful projects in the space.
Yeah, on top of that, I'd like to add that, you know, this is bleeding edge, right? So it's not for everybody. That's the honest answer right now. Not only on the product side, right? As we've already said, not every product needs a blockchain, obviously. But on top of that, even if you need it, you might not be ready for it, right? Because it requires still a certain amount of skills, right? To be able to do it, you need to understand what are the risks of what you're doing. Just to give you an example, you know, here in this industry, we see almost a hack a day, right? Hacks or scam or whatever, right? So it might not be a great idea for certain institutions that, you know, they move too slowly for them to be able to adapt to what the industry is moving towards, right? Because here we find a bug, we got to patch it up right now. We had millions of dollars in those smart contracts. We find another bug tomorrow, right? So it's kind of like you're living on the edge, right? And I understand it's reasonable that not everybody can join that right now, right? They might need actually the industry to mature a little bit more for them to jump on, right? That's why there's always, in any industry, right, generally speaking, there's always this renewable cycle of new companies coming forth, right? There's always this massive corporation that once was a startup, right? And then they can't do everything, right? And they can't do certain things because of how they're made, how their policies work, right? They have to act differently. So then new startups come on, right? So I guess that for some of the skeptics, they are sometimes rightfully so skeptic that this is not for them, right? It might not be for them, actually.
Yeah.
I want to throw out a step two. So, and I agree with that, everything Carlos said. This is not a world that everybody's going to be able to play in right now. But, you know, I think if you establish that this is the right world for you, if you've looked at the landscape and you kind of have an idea of what's out there, one of the things that we've done at Polyant is partnered with a company like Hello Iconic, because they're immersed in the technology, right? And so if we have a small slice that we really want to iterate on quickly, that can be a really great path. Find a technology partner who is active in that space, who understands, you know, top to bottom what it looks like to fully launch a project, and they can help you iterate through that much more quickly and probably accelerate that learning curve for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I'll jump to another question, and this actually touches that part of the NFTs. So we've seen a lot about NFTs being used on the digital art and such. But I know some people on the audience and you here are also active on the NFT world. Do you see, or I even rephrase it to, have you seen interesting projects that are approaching it for other things more related to physical goods, or other types of contract, like real contracts that exist on the current legal environment? So I don't know who wants to start with that.
I've seen, yeah, there's less of that happening. Obviously, most of the action in crypto is crypto for crypto. Right now, it feels like the network is bootstrapping itself by leveraging each project, leveraging each other. So most of the stuff is, when you look at it really closely, is pretty much synthetic. There's not that many projects still around. I think that it will happen over time as more traditional or legacy organizations learn the ropes about how to use these networks of what's known as security tokens, or something that is connected to a legal countersign. I think I'm of the opinion, I used to be more crypto anarchist in the past, but ultimately the law is the law, and code is code. And the law, it's something that it operates under a different kind of logic, which is justice. Justice is a different element altogether. You cannot rationalize justice. So in that regard, when you build with real world assets, you have to consider the legal implications of building with that, and the regulation or whatever is involved with that asset. There are interesting projects. Like I remember a project that does fractions real estate in the United States. I think it's called Realty.co. And you have to go through the regulatory, you have to be an accredited investor in the United States, unfortunately, but that's the regulation to be a shareholder of these assets, of these houses that they are offering, tokenizing by giving you shares of $100 a piece. Which is really interesting. And when you hold the token, the rent of that asset gets distributed to your Ethereum address on a daily basis every day, which I found like an interesting mechanism to show how much more efficient crypto can be for the management of an asset like real estate than traditional systems. But that project, when I researched it, it was clear that you had to go through a KYC, you had to go through the usual process to demonstrate that you are effectively an accredited investor in America, because that's the regulation over there. So death and taxes, you cannot avoid some kind of regulatory element if you're going to be touching atoms. Take that into consideration. But nonetheless, I think we will see more of that as traditional industries, learn how exciting the financial possibilities this kind of technology can breathe into them. And that's a matter of, the people with those responsibilities learning about this technology, like all of us here today.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think you're touching an important point of the legal aspect. We were actually brainstorming with a couple of friends a while ago, and one thing that I was kind of thinking is, it's with the open source community, I think one of the changing elements of open source was when they basically hacked the legal system and they created the concept of the copyleft, right? So when they said, okay, let's create a contract that is bound to all the legal framework of copyright, but it actually creates the concept of the open source. And I remember, I forgot the documentary that I saw in the 90s about it, but I always saw it as a revolutionary element. So thinking of, do we need maybe, I don't know, like a copy chain, something legal contract that binds the existing legal framework to the blockchain and to the smart contract. And although I've seen it on specific initiatives, I don't know if I've seen it as a general concept that basically transformed the open source. So maybe we need something like that in the current ecosystem. So just food for thought there. Yeah.
There's actually a project, I don't know if it's still called this, but openlaw.io was doing a bit of this, and they're basically creating a composable framework for attorneys to be able to author smart contracts. And I think that's a big part of bridging the gap is, going from blending these worlds of code and law. We need to connect the dots, and it's going to take a combination of education, regulatory changes, and also educating people who are writing and defending these laws, giving them the tools to be able to do this in a way that makes sense to them and still brings their knowledge of the law to the table.
There's also another cool one called the LAO, which is trying to basically connect the concept of a DAO to a legally registered company. I think they're doing it in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken.
And we saw the Wyoming also accepting DAOs as a
entities. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome.
That's very early days.
Very early days. Yeah. But I think we're starting to see what Santi was saying, that although we all have a little bit of anarchism in our hearts, at the same time, we live in a legal framework. So I think it's that matching and hacking of that legal framework that probably will make all this work succeed. So we were a little bit over time. So just want to, I think there were a lot of great questions. I feel like there's still conversation to be had, but yeah, so this is the contact for all the team, for all the panelists. I would like maybe each of you, if you could give us like in 30 seconds, I don't know, some advice for those people that want to execute blockchain products successfully. Let's start with the order of the images. So Nick, then Santi, then Carlos. Yeah.
I'll go back to, form a strong hypothesis about what you are trying to do. Don't do it for technology's sake, really, or if that is what you're trying to do, be clear about that. Understand what you're trying to validate and try to shape that into a small slice of value that you can develop quickly to either prove to yourself or prove to your team or prove to the end user that something is possible.
Awesome, thank you. Santi?
Avoid the complexity as much as possible. Keep it simple, stupid. Test-driven development. All of those things have been valuable lessons across my career as a developer, not just blockchain developer. It's very easy to get trapped thinking features and dreaming, incredible possibilities. But if you open too many universes, you will end up not being in any universe. So be careful of the multiverse. Stick to this one. Keep it real and avoid complexity.
Awesome. Carlos?
Basically, whatever you do, you're probably going to invest a lot of time on it. So make sure that the value that you're delivering to the people that you're bringing this to, your users, your partners, whoever you're building this for, is worth it, right? Ideally, try to use blockchain for something that can grow many orders of magnitude, or at least a few times better of the existing solutions, right? You can deliver more value. Because if you're just delivering something that'll be 1% better, but you're going to spend a year or more on it, then you might want to reconsider that. So that's my advice.
Awesome. I think this is great. Deliver a lot of value. I like that. So took some notes. Small size of value. Avoid complexity. And I like that part. Like, it's small size of value. It's a fragment of it, but at the same time, it has to deliver a lot of value. So I really love the combination. Well, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Nick, Santi, Carlos. I think this was a great panel. I think we've learned a lot. You're in the trenches building things, and that's exactly what we like and what we love. I hope people liked it. I hope you can share it. If you want to contact directly, we're going to share the contact information of everyone. But thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this and you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.